Paul Hill, I think you guys have seen his bio. Paul, well, I'm going to read a little bit of like his background, but then that doesn't really get to the essence of the guy. He's one of the kindest, thoughtful, and caring people I've ever met. And I met him a long time ago and been working with him on and off, I guess, over a decade. But Paul holds a PhD and an MA from the Ohio State University. He's been an advisor to numerous governors, mayors, state lawmakers, policymakers, state and district superintendents, and to business and philanthropy over the years. And your efforts always cross political boundaries. I don't even know if you're a Democrat or a Republican. I've spent a lot of time with you.
I'm not saying.
And you've been involved in like some of the most important education issues in America really since the 1970s. And these are issues that, from school funding, going back to the 1970s, to charter schools and school choice more generally, innovation and what works in governance, and we'll talk more about this. One of my favorite reports that you've co-authored, and it's entitled How States Can Promote Local Innovation, Options, and Problem Solving in Public Education. And in that report, you start off by saying the accretion of state law over the years has constrained local education leaders' ability to innovate, improve, and transform their schools. So you say the accretion of state law over the years has constrained local education leaders' ability to innovate, improve, and transform their schools. Half the people in this room are state lawmakers, so we're going to have to be careful how we go down this path, but I think that's an interesting one. We're going to start with Paul. We're going to have three topics we're going to talk about. And thanks to all, I've talked to a bunch of people like what could be useful. One is school finance. One is charter district collaboration. And then the third are rural education issues. And believe it or not, Paul's actually expert on all three of these. And it fits because these are the conversations we're having. So school finance, Paul, over the last 3 years, Idaho has been having, led by folks in this room, I see Wendy Horman out there, to look at a new form of state funding. And even just today, the House, I know, had a hearing on this exact issue. And so with that, I'll just kind of jump into this particular issue with you. One thing I need to note, there are white cards floating around. If you have any questions, please write down your questions on the white card. And somebody from my team, Suzanne Metzger, who organizes all of this, is somewhere around, and some others will take there you are. We'll take those cards and bring those up, and we'll add those questions as we go along. So, Paul, in 2008, you authored with school finance experts Marguerite Rosa and James Harvey a study called Facing the Future, Financing Productive Schools. This was about a decade ago now, right? And in the introduction to that report, you said what was noted that, I don't know if the methodology people cares, this was the most rigorous study ever done on school finance. 30 separate studies at a cost of $6 million involving an interdisciplinary team of more than 40 scholars from across the country. But the key takeaway that you shared with that is that all this work leads to one conclusion, that school finance today works against the focused and efficient use of resources to promote student learning. Can you say more about that?
I will. I want to say thank you, and I do want to note that anyone who gets introduced as having done something for a very long time, it's by definition pretty old.
Wise.
It's a blessing when people are introduced that way. But when we did the study, it became so obvious to us, something that's so obvious to you. I know you've been going through this in Idaho with school finance, that legislators who want to could provide more money for kids' education face a dilemma, which is that if you put the money just on the table, it almost goes into the salary schedule, so you end up with a more expensive system than you had, but not a different one. And if you don't put it on the salary schedule, but get it to it with unrestrained, you're afraid of doing that, and so a way to keep the money from going to the salary schedule is to constrain it for particular programs and for particular uses. And what happens then is that over time, there is more money, but there also is a larger structure of programmatic activities and more constraints. And so, in some ways, schools get less free and less complicated the more money they get. And that was the problem we were trying to address. And we didn't think that legislators were being unreasonable in being worried about either of those options, because both of them are scary. I just want to say, for those of you who don't know, that in Washington State, where I live, we had a big court case and litigation and fines against the legislature, and finally several $1 billion added to the school system budget just last year. And at least in Seattle, it's all gone into the salary schedule, despite the fact that it was supposed to do something else. And so it's understandable why legislators are worried about that. And we were trying to think, how would you jump between the horns of the dilemma and create a way that schools can have more money and more freedom? And our idea was one that I think you have been working on, which is to tag the money to the student, not to the use, so that when a kid appears at a school, the school can actually say, what does this child need? Let's get it for him. Instead of saying, here's a child in our school, here's what we do, I hope it works for him. And I think that's the essence of what our proposal was, and I think from what Terry's told me, that's what you've been working on. Terry, have I missed that, or?
Well, there are smarter people in here than I, but I see heads nodding yes. So one of the, I think, challenges that folks are starting to encounter here, how do you get at weights? What do you weight? What are the categories? And why would you say that a child in poverty needs more money than my child? Or why would you say an ELL help? Because I know this is a challenge of identifying what the weights should be, how to actually, what's the evidence to back up the weights? I mean, I know you've been involved in this for a long time in terms of those exact conversations with different states. I believe that's a conversation that's happening here. Maybe you can give some insights.
Well, the rationale for weights is straightforward, that the kids whose outcomes are not as good presumably need more than they're getting. And so the weight is an opportunity for the school to do something extra, tutoring or whatever the child needs. The problem is that there are so few clear success examples, especially for the most disadvantaged, that show you how money translates into activity. You don't know what the weight needs to be. And so we academics are, if we're honest, we have to say, yes, it makes sense to weight. Second, how should you weight? Well, you should try something, and if it turns out it's not enough, you should ask, why isn't it enough? And it's because the school isn't free enough, though that's one thing. But if it's because there's not enough money for that child to succeed, it means you have to raise the weight. So I regard a weight as for the legislature kind of an initial approximation, and then something you keep open. You keep asking, is that weight sufficient, or is that weight too big? And one of the dilemmas is that, to go back to my earlier comment about if you put the money right on the system that exists now, the money will go to make that same system more expensive. So in fact, if schools don't have freedom and a press to do better, they will not really improve with the weights. It just gives more money for the same stuff. So the weights have to come with freedom and then with inquiry, looking at the data and asking, is this weight translating into activity at the school level that's making a difference for the child?
So you mentioned Washington State. What's wrong with just bumping a lot more money to pay teachers more? Don't you get better teachers, and aren't teachers the most important thing in a child's education?
Yeah.
Tell us, what's the flexibilities that you garner, and why not just say, let's give more money for teachers, because at the end of the day, they're the ones in front of the kids?
So can I just be a bleeding heart for a minute? Just to go over? So you know, I don't think teachers are paid very well, and my reason for that is not just compassion. It's that they're in a, you know, the teaching profession is in a market for talent, and if teaching is not an attractive job, or if, unfortunately, it's not a bad job to start, but after a while it gets terrible relative to other talented people, then the best people leave it. And so there's every reason to want to make sure that teaching is a job that's attractive over the long run. And that's why you have to be attentive to whether teachers are paid enough. And in most places they're not. But on the other side, the system we have now, where teachers all get on a salary scale and they just go up that scale by longevity with a little kind of semi-fake addition of degrees or so on. I'm not saying that they're not all good, but a lot of them are not. It's just a game teachers play to get more money. Well, it isn't actually making teaching more attractive to anybody, and except the people that are already in it. And consistent with our earlier point about how to make money work better, is money needs to go to the school with the child, where the people who run the school have the problem of serving the child well, and then their question is, how do we get the best mix of teachers into this school? How do we use the money to get the best mix of teachers? And if that means we have to pay some people a lot because they're important in this school, we have to do it. But it's much more empirical to give a school the money and give them every encouragement to be effective, and therefore to hire the best teachers they can. And that's a way to get the best teaching force. But if you pay good teachers and bad teachers the same over their whole careers, then you don't get that. And one last thing I'll rave about, because I know Idaho's really concerned about STEM. A lot of research shows that teachers who have STEM credentials and really good math and science skills, their first jobs, they're paid about as well as people of similar qualification who go into industry. But the salary scale that is in lockstep with everybody else, kindergarten teachers and people who teach whatever, that salary scale means that after about 5 years, their salaries are pathetically lower than their colleagues who are similarly skilled. And so what do? They think, well, am I going to stick with teaching all my life and make a big sacrifice? Some might, but a lot of them say, hey, I got a family to raise, I think I'm going to go work for industry. And so the salary scale is actually dumping the best people out. If instead you had a situation where people whose actual market value was high could demand more pay, and people whose market value is not very high, I'm not saying they're not good people, but there's not a really big market for kindergarten teachers outside of schools, they wouldn't be paid as well. But you can see the way that would benefit students.
So, in response, there's this belief, and we all have been a part of seeing it, where teaching is a noble profession. You get into it, you're good at it, you put your 25, 30, 35 years in, and it's a pathway. And I think I hear from people like you and others that has worked in the past, but that the expectations of the young people coming forward now may not necessarily be they want to do a 30-year career. It may be that you've got really good people who want to teach. We have Teach for America here. We have others who might want to give 5 years and see it as service. I want to give something back to it, and I see schools as a way for me to do that. But then I may want to go back to school and get an advanced degree and do something different. You hear talk all the time that, we're going to have my children are going to have 7, 8 different professions. Is that hogwash, or is there?
No, I don't think it's hogwash. I mean, I do think that the really excellent teacher that wants to make a career of it is a total gem, and every bit of lovey stuff we say about them is warranted. I'm just talking to a professor whose memory was that his academic career was created by somebody who realized what his talents were and drew them out. And that was a teacher that was a lifelong pro, and so you want people to stay like that, but not everyone who stays their whole life is like that. You want to have schools be able to make the judgment, this person who's the lifelong pro whom I'm paying a lot because of their accumulated experience, they're worth every nickel of it. And be able to say, there's another person here who's kind of old and out of date, and they're not worth it. And so they either have to upskill or find other work. And then to be open to the possibility that people will want to come in laterally from industry or the military, other places where they've actually learned how to teach, and give them a pay that's consistent with their abilities, not their tenure, their longevity in the school district, and allowing some people that want to come in, very high quality people want to come in for short times and circulate. One funny thing, I've studied a lot of private schools just to figure out why the differences are so great. And private schools, even the ones that have pretty good high tuitions, they have absolute limits on how much they can spend. Even if the limits are high, there are limits. And that means that not every teacher there can be at the top of the salary schedule. They just can't do that. And so they always have a mix of the senior teachers that everybody remembers for generations, and good journey people and newcomers, and they circulate them. And sometimes the newcomers include 2 or 3 people that they want to keep for the rest of their lives, and so they nurture them and bring them along, but other newcomers come and go. And that's the way you have a high quality school with a fixed budget. And what we do in public education is we hide school budgets so that the district pays whatever the school staffing costs. So if the school has all senior teachers, the district pays more. Nobody knows that. And if you seriously wanted to put money to work effectively, you wouldn't hide the cost of teachers, you'd make them obvious, especially the school managers. And it's often said, I know union people object that, well, school managers would try to get the cheapest people they could so they could do something else. I don't know what else they do with the money, but something else with the money. But of course, they'd have a lousy school. You know, so it does, that argument doesn't make sense. And the idea that a school is a real organization that has resources and solves problems and uses talent, instead of a bureaucracy that rules and people rain down upon it, and it does whatever it's required to do.
So how do you hold, if you say we're gonna empower districts, we're gonna empower schools to make decisions about their money, about how they do things, and we're gonna get the money to them with as few strings attached as possible, what do we care about as the outputs, and how do we get at those? How do we know that this is working? How do we self-correct if it's not working?
Right.
How to give us a sense of what we should be looking for in terms of results, outputs, outcomes?
And this is a really hard question at a time when everybody is rightly skeptical of testing as the sole criterion. I do think that testing is necessary because nothing else gives you a prompt answer, but it's not sufficient. So I think you need to hold schools accountable for the performance of their kids at the next level. If you really knew for a given school what proportion of the kids who left 5th grade and went to middle school and were really ready for the normal math class or the algebra class, and that was the basis on which the school is held accountable, you're dealing with real performance. And the same is true for high schools. That accountability obviously needs to be about are the kids safe, are the kids learning a variety of things, but mainly are they ready for work or ready for non-remediated admission to college, and what's the rate, how does that compare with other schools? Those kinds of outcome measures are the only ones that you can really trust, and I don't think we pay enough attention to them. I do want to say that you can't talk about accountability without getting all involved in testing. And testing as the sole measure of a school is going to get perverted. But to think about doing without it is absolutely nuts, because that's the only measure you have that tells you whether an individual kid is going off the rails right now. And I really think that testing needs to be regarded as an asset for school leaders and for teachers, principally, and only as kind of a check, an emergency check on accountability issues.
So I apologize. We're basically giving you some ideas and then moving on, and everything is worth going a lot deeper.
People are eating more now. I think they're tired of this. Yeah.
So one of the things in your most recent, you talk about a navigator.
Yeah.
All right. And this idea, so you hear there's school choice, and there's an acceptance in this state for school choice. And I think it's fair to say parents who understand what their options are, they explore them, they go out and they seek ones that make the best sense for their kids are probably the sort of choosers that are going to benefit most from choice, right? You might want to talk to that, but
so
then the navigator idea.
Carrie asked
what
me
is
a
a
question
navigator?
about the idea of a navigator, and I'm going to give a really round-the-barn answer. I want to tell you something that I'm passionate about right now and get to it. I live in Seattle, and everybody in Seattle has seen a picture of Bill Gates and Paul Allen, the founders of Microsoft, at ages 12 and 14, sitting in front of a computer at their high school the high school paid to have that computer linked to the Boeing computer at the time when that's all you had. And these are the two dorkiest looking kids you ever saw in your life. But their high school said, these kids don't give a darn about most of what we teach, but they're on fire about this computer, and so they put them in touch with it, and a few good things happened as a consequence. And I got thinking about that in light of some other privileged kids I know that are going to high school, where the school is kind of a curator. The school is saying, this is what this kid needs and we're going to get it for him. And the school actually holds back money. They don't use all their money up by hiring all their teachers and that's that. They use it to buy things the kids need, and then sometimes the parents can actually do those things. Well, if you thought about that in the public sphere with schools that don't have vast tuitions and the parents don't have a lot of money to buy lessons and so on, but instead, if you could subsidize regular low-income kids to have some of those opportunities to get extra or supplementary or special interest experiences that they would otherwise never get, there has to end up being a market. People will be demanding those things. And the question is, how could you protect unsophisticated parents in a market where people were offering all kinds of things that looked like like Bill Gates and Paul Allen at Boeing were actually no good. And so we thought about, if you're going to do this in the public sector for public school kids, maybe you need to invent something that is kind of like the analog of the internist in medical care. That's the person that is your diagnostician and advocate and knows what you need and helps you and advises you and keeps you from missing big opportunities and keeps you from getting flim-flam.
So one more before we switch topics. I mean, so we're seeing it. We see it with kids. There's a school called One Stone here that is already in this space, and some of the leaders of that school are here. But it's really empowering young people and families to create the educational options into a unified package, right?
Yeah.
But there's certain common elements you need to be an American, right? There's some history, it's this balancing between giving maximum flexibility in order to access those opportunities that really inspire, while at the same time there's some things that you'll need to learn just so that you understand the commons of America. So how do you think about that?
So totally agree. And I didn't come here to talk just as a futurist, but you think about what could happen in the next 20 years with the huge changes in the economy, the huge changes in jobs, parents being very anxious about whether their kids are going to be prepared for anything when they leave school, the need for a lot more information coming downward from industry about what jobs are actually going to be available and what skills are going to be rewarded. That situation is a very high risk situation. I don't think I'm coming here with the answer, but the problem is that you need to free the system up to create innovation, to create opportunity, to create the kinds of opportunities for regular kids that the best and most advantaged kids now have of getting enrichment and following their talents, and yet avoid misuse, abuse, and fraud, or very bad mistakes by parents. And so we've tried to think of how would you do that. And one of the ideas is to create publicly funded navigators so that you have somebody who is your helper to figure out, here are my talents, here are the school options I have, here are the enrichment options I have, how do I think about how to use all of them to my best result. And one thing we've thought is that the navigators, if they play that role, they become accountability mechanisms, because they will say, stay away from that vendor, they're no good. They ruined my last kid. You know, so I think it will create structures that will provide information that real people need.